Welcome to another journey through history's quieter corners. Tonight, we explore the gentle world of Victorian bell-ringing networks, those intricate webs of communication that stretched across England's countryside, carried not by telegraph wires or postal roads, but by the ancient voices of church bells themselves. In an age before instant communication, when steam trains were still novel and the telephone remained a distant dream, communities found connection through bronze and iron, through careful timing and practiced hands. This is the story of how sound became a language, how towers became beacons, and how ordinary people created extraordinary networks of communication that pulsed gently across the Victorian landscape. Let the rhythm of history carry you along as we discover the world of change ringing, court appealing, and the quiet devotion of those who kept England's bell singing through the longest nights and brightest days of the 19th century. As twilight settles over the English countryside in the year 1850, a gentle sound begins to drift across the fields and villages. Not the hurried clatter of industrial progress, not the urgent whistle of steam engines, but something far older and more contemplative. The measured, mathematical music of church bells practicing their ancient art. Change ringing, as it was known to the Victorians, represented something remarkable in human endeavor, a pursuit that demanded both physical coordination and mathematical precision, yet served no purpose beyond beauty itself. Unlike the urgent tolling that announced deaths or the celebratory pealing that marked weddings, change ringing existed purely as an expression of order, pattern, and community harmony. The practice had its roots deep in English soil, stretching back centuries before Victoria took her throne. But it was during her long reign that bell ringing evolved from a simple craft into something approaching a science, a network of communication that connected villages across vast distances through shared methods, common terminology, and the gradual development of what we might recognize today as a primitive form of social networking. In the Tower of St. Mary's Church in Little Thornfield, a typical Cotswolds village, the evening practice session begins much as it has for generations. 6 men gather in the ringing chamber, their day's work behind them. Thomas the blacksmith, his hands still bearing traces of coal dust. William the miller, flour dusting his sleeves. Edward the carpenter, wood shavings clinging to his woolen jacket. They move with the unhurried pace of those who understand that rushing serves no purpose here. The bells hanging above them represent centuries of craftsmanship, cast in bronze by foundries whose techniques had changed little since medieval times. Each bell bears its own character, its own voice in the conversation about to begin. The tenor, largest and deepest, hangs silent and patient, waiting for its turn to speak. Above it, the smaller bells arrange themselves in perfect mathematical progression, each one precisely tuned to create harmony with its neighbors. Change ringing differs fundamentally from the random pealing that most people associate with church bells. Where casual ringing might produce a cheerful but chaotic sound, change ringing follows strict mathematical principles that create patterns of extraordinary complexity and beauty. Each bell sounds exactly once in each row, and the order of the bells changes according to predetermined methods that can extend for hours without repetition. Thomas takes his position at the tenor's rope, feeling its familiar weight and texture. The rope itself tells a story, woven from local hemp, worn smooth by generations of hands, marked at precise intervals to help the ringer judge the bell's position, even in darkness. Above him, the tenor hangs mouth upward in its resting position, nearly a ton of bronze balanced so precisely that a gentle pull will set it in motion. The mathematics of change ringing would fascinate any Victorian gentleman with an interest in natural philosophy. With 6 bells, as they have at St. Mary's, there exist precisely 720 different possible arrangements, or changes, as the ringers call them. To ring all possible changes without repetition creates what is known as an extent, and accomplishing this feat requires exactly 3 hours and 40 minutes of continuous ringing. But tonight, like most practice nights, they will attempt something more modest. Perhaps a few plain courses of grandsire doubles, a method that creates pleasing patterns while remaining within the capabilities of their small band. The method's name itself speaks to the tradition's deep roots. Grandsire, suggesting the ancient wisdom passed down through generations. Doubles, referring to the mathematical properties of ringing 5 bells with a tenor that remains stationary. Edward, serving as conductor for tonight's practice, calls out softly, "Look to." Treble's going. "She's gone." His voice carries the ritual phrases that have guided English bell ringers for centuries. Words that connect this moment to countless others across the nation's bell towers. The treble bell begins its journey, starting the complex dance that will unfold over the next 20 minutes. The sound that emerges differs markedly from random bell ringing. Instead of chaos, there is order. Instead of noise, there is music of a uniquely English character. Each bell sounds clearly and distinctly, neither rushing ahead nor lagging behind, creating a rhythm that seems to breathe with the natural world around it. The intervals between strikes remain precisely measured, creating space for contemplation between each Brahms voice. In the village below, residents pause in their evening routines to listen. Mrs. Henderson, hanging laundry in her back garden, finds herself unconsciously timing her movements to the bell's rhythm. At the village inn, conversations quiet slightly as the familiar patterns drift through the open windows. Children playing in the lane stop their games to count the changes, trying to predict when the pattern will return to its beginning. This is communication of a different sort entirely, not the transmission of specific information, but the sharing of something more subtle and profound. The bells speak of continuity, of tradition maintained, of community gathering for purposes beyond mere utility. Their voice carries across fields where sheep graze peacefully, over streams where watermills turn at their eternal pace, through orchards heavy with autumn fruit. The technical aspects of change ringing would challenge any Victorian engineer. Each bell must be hung with mathematical precision, its headstock angled exactly to ensure proper balance. The wheel that controls the bell's motion requires careful sizing to match the bell's weight and the tower's proportions. Too large, and the bell becomes difficult to control. Too small, and precise timing becomes impossible. The ropes themselves demand constant attention. Hemp fibers stretch and contract with changes in humidity, requiring regular adjustment to maintain proper length. The sally, the woolen grip that each ringer holds, must be positioned at exactly the right height for comfort during the long sequences that serious change ringing demands. Even the floor of the ringing chamber receives careful consideration. Boards must be solid enough to support the ringer's movements, yet flexible enough to absorb the tremendous forces transmitted through the ropes from the bells above. As the practice continues, the ringers settle into the meditative rhythm that experienced change ringers know well. Their movements become automatic, freeing their minds to focus entirely on the mathematical patterns unfolding around them. Each ringer listens not only for his own bell's proper place in the sequence, but for the overall melody created by the interaction of all 6 voices. The method they are ringing tonight, grandsire doubles, follows rules that would delight any mathematician. The bells change places according to strict principles. The treble bell hunts up and down through the other bells, while the remaining bells follow predetermined patterns that ensure no change repeats until the entire sequence completes. The beauty lies not in any single moment, but in the gradual unfolding of pattern over time. This mathematical precision serves purposes beyond mere aesthetics. In an age before reliable timekeeping, the regulated patterns of change ringing provided communities with accurate temporal markers. A quarter peal of grandsire doubles requires exactly 45 minutes, long enough for bread to bake properly, for a church service to conclude, for important meetings to reach their natural conclusion. The social aspects of bell ringing create bonds that extend far beyond the tower itself. These 6 men, gathered 3 evenings each week and every Sunday morning, develop friendships based on shared concentration and mutual dependence. A single mistake by any ringer affects the entire band, creating a culture of gentle correction and patient instruction that builds trust over years of practice. Young Timothy, the newest member of their band, still struggles with the precise timing that experienced ringers take for granted, but his companions offer encouragement rather than criticism, remembering their own early fumbling attempts to master the rope's peculiar behavior. The learning process itself becomes a form of meditation. The gradual coordination of hand and eye, the development of musical memory, the patient accumulation of skill through repetition. The bell's voices carry different qualities depending on atmospheric conditions. On clear, cold evenings like tonight, their sound travels farther and clearer, reaching villages 2 or 3 miles distant. Warm summer nights muffle the tones, creating a softer, more intimate effect that seems to wrap the immediate community in bronze-toned comfort. Rain changes everything, adding a liquid quality to the sound that makes the bells seem to weep gently over the landscape. This evening's practice draws to its conclusion as Edward calls 4 rounds, the simple descending scale that returns all bells to their natural order. One by one, the bronze voices find their proper places in the sequence, creating a moment of resolution that feels like a gentle sigh settling over the village. The final stroke of the tenor hangs in the evening air for long moments before fading into the natural sounds of approaching night. As the ringers secure their ropes and begin their descent from the tower, they carry with them the satisfaction of time well spent, of ancient traditions maintained, of community bonds strengthened through shared purpose. Tomorrow evening will bring another practice, another opportunity to explore the mathematical beauty hidden within bronze and rope, another chance to send their gentle messages across the darkening countryside. The bells themselves rest now, hanging silent and patient until morning brings the call to Sunday service. But their evening's work continues to echo in the memories of those who heard them, creating connections that stretch beyond sight, beyond the immediate concerns of daily life, into the timeless realm where mathematics becomes music, where tradition becomes poetry, where the simple act of pulling a rope becomes a form of prayer. In the grey PI dawn of a Sunday morning in 1862, Samuel Weatherby climbs the narrow stone steps to the bell tower of All Saints' Church in Middleshire. His footsteps echo softly in the ancient stairwell, worn smooth by centuries of bell ringers making this same ascent. At 63 years of age, Samuel has served as tower captain for nearly 3 decades, his life intertwined with the rhythm of bells and the quiet community that tends them. The role of tower captain carries responsibilities that extend far beyond the mechanical act of ringing bells. Samuel serves as keeper of traditions passed down through generations, guardian of methods and techniques that exist nowhere in written form, living repository of the subtle knowledge that transforms bronze and rope into instruments of community communication. His weathered hands know each bell's particular temperament, each rope's individual characteristics, each ringer's strengths and gentle weaknesses. This morning, as every Sunday morning for the past 28 years, Samuel arrives first to inspect the bells and prepare for the day's ringing. The tower chamber feels cool and still, holding the silence of the night just past. Dust motes dance in the early light filtering through the narrow windows, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere that speaks to the sacred nature of the work about to begin. Each bell receives careful attention during Samuel's PI service inspection. He runs experienced fingers along the ropes, checking for signs of wear that might compromise safety or precision. The hemp fibers speak to him of weather conditions, humidity changes, and the accumulated stress of countless practice sessions. A fray here, a stretched section there. Each rope tells its own story of faithful service and gradual surrender to time. The bells themselves hang in perfect stillness, their bronze surfaces catching and reflecting the morning light. Samuel knows each one intimately, their casting dates, their foundry marks, their individual voices and personalities. The treble, cast in 1796 by Thomas Mears of London, possesses a bright clarity that cuts through even the thickest fog. The second bell, slightly younger, adds a warmer tone that complements without competing. Together, the 8 bells of All Saints create a voice that residents recognize immediately, even from several miles distance. Bell tower communities in Victorian England operated according to social structures that reflected the broader patterns of rural life, yet maintained their own unique characteristics. The tower captain commanded respect similar to that afforded a village schoolmaster or parish clerk, learned in specialized knowledge, responsible for maintaining standards, trusted with preserving traditions that connected the present moment to centuries of continuous practice. Beneath the tower captain, the band organized itself according to experience and skill rather than social class. In the bell tower, the distinction between gentleman farmer and agricultural laborer mattered less than one's ability to handle a rope with precision and grace. This democratic aspect of bell ringing created unusual social spaces where men of different backgrounds could interact as equals, united by their shared dedication to the ancient art. Young ringers began their education through careful observation and patient instruction. Samuel remembers his own apprenticeship under old William Garrett, who had learned his methods from ringers whose memories stretched back to the previous century. The knowledge passed between generations like a living thing, adapting slightly to each new group while maintaining its essential character. The learning process required months of dedicated practice. New ringers spent weeks simply learning to handle a single bell, developing the muscle memory necessary to control several hundredweight of bronze swinging overhead. The motion itself defied simple description, not pulling down on the rope, but rather guiding it through a complex arc that required perfect timing and gentle strength. Physical conditioning developed gradually through practice. Shoulders and arms grew accustomed to the particular stresses of bell ringing, while hands developed calluses in precisely the spots where rope met palm. The work demanded endurance rather than explosive strength, the ability to maintain steady, controlled movements through sequences that might last an hour or more. But the physical aspects represented only the beginning of a ringer's education. The mental discipline required for complex change ringing challenged even the most intelligent students. Each ringer must hold in memory not only his own bell's path through the changing patterns, but also the positions of all the other bells, creating a three-dimensional mental map that shifted with each successive change. The methods themselves possessed names that reflected their origins and complexity. Grandsire, Bob Major, Canterbury Pleasure, Oxford Treble Bob. Each method required different mental approaches, different patterns of movement, different strategies for maintaining accuracy through long sequences. A ringer might spend years mastering a single method well enough to ring it perfectly under the pressure of actual performance. Samuel's band at All Saints included men whose ages spanned for decades. Young James, barely 18, brought enthusiasm and quick reflexes to complement the steady reliability of older ringers like George, whose 70-year-old hands still moved with surprising grace and precision. The mixture of generations created a natural teaching environment where knowledge flowed organically from elder to younger members. The tower itself shaped the character of their ringing. All Saints possessed unusual acoustics that seemed to enhance certain combinations of bells while muffling others. Samuel had learned to adjust his band's technique to take advantage of these characteristics, creating a sound that carried farther and clearer than might be expected from bells of their size. The stone walls, worn smooth by centuries of weather, seemed to breathe with the rhythm of the bells, absorbing and releasing sound in patterns that enhanced the overall musical effect. Maintenance of the bells and their associated equipment fell primarily to the tower captain and his most experienced ringers. This work required skills that extended far beyond ringing itself. Basic carpentry for repairing wheel and frame, elementary metalworking for adjusting stays and clappers, rope working for splicing and maintaining the complex rigging that made controlled ringing possible. The annual inspection and maintenance of the bells followed seasonal rhythms that connected the tower community to agricultural cycles around them. Spring brought attention to rope condition after winter's humidity and cold had tested hemp fibers to their limits. Summer provided optimal conditions for major maintenance work, when long daylight hours and stable weather permitted complex projects. Autumn required preparation for winter's challenges, ensuring that equipment would function reliably through months of harsh conditions. Financial responsibility for bell maintenance created interesting dynamics within tower communities. While the church provided basic support, significant expenses often required contributions from ringers themselves or fundraising efforts that involved a broader community. Samuel had organized countless parish teas, harvest festivals, and bell ringing demonstrations to raise funds for rope replacement, wheel repair, and the occasional recasting of cracked bells. The social calendar of a tower community extended throughout the year, creating bonds that strengthened with each shared experience. Annual tower outings might involve visits to other parishes to ring different bells and learn new methods. These expeditions served multiple purposes: broadening ringers' technical skills, strengthening relationships between neighboring communities, and spreading knowledge of successful innovations in technique and equipment. Competition between towers remained gentle and friendly, more concerned with technical excellence than victory over rivals. A tower might take pride in ringing a particularly complex method flawlessly, or in maintaining their bells in exceptional condition, or in the musical quality of their Sunday service ringing. These achievements brought respect from neighboring communities and attracted visits from ringers eager to learn from successful techniques. The rhythm of tower life followed patterns that synchronized with both religious and seasonal calendars. Sunday morning service ringing began 2 hours before worship, allowing time for proper warming up and final practice of any challenging passages. Wedding ringing required different skills. The ability to produce joyful, energetic sequences that conveyed celebration without sacrificing musical quality. Funeral tolling demanded the most delicate touch, creating sounds that spoke of sorrow and remembrance without overwhelming grief. Evening practices became social institutions that anchored community life in ways that extended far beyond their immediate musical purpose. The gentle sound of bells drifting across villages on Tuesday and Thursday evenings signaled the rhythm of weekly life as surely as church services on market days. Children learned to associate these sounds with stability, continuity, and the presence of dedicated adults maintaining traditions that connected present moments to an ancient past. The knowledge required for tower leadership accumulated slowly over decades of devoted practice. Samuel could identify neighboring towers by the distinctive characteristics of their ringing: the slightly hurried pace that marked St. Peter's in Westham, the unusually deep tenor that distinguished Holy Trinity in Oakenford, the precise mathematical timing that made St. Andrews in Thornbury famous throughout the county. Weather affected everything about bell ringing, creating challenges and opportunities that required constant adaptation. Cold winter mornings made bronze bells ring sharp and bright, their voices carrying extraordinary distances through still air. Summer heat softened the metal slightly, creating warmer tones but requiring adjustments to timing and technique. Rain transformed tower acoustics entirely, muffling external sound while amplifying every movement within the ringing chamber. The gradual accumulation of skill created hierarchies based purely on competence and dedication. A young ringer might advance to conducting practice sessions within a few years if he demonstrated both technical ability and the patience necessary for teaching others. Tower captaincy typically required decades of experience, not only in ringing technique but in managing the complex social dynamics that kept volunteer bands functioning smoothly year after year. As Samuel completes his morning inspection and prepares for the arrival of his fellow ringers, he reflects on the subtle satisfaction that this work provides, not the dramatic achievements that mark other pursuits, but the quiet fulfillment of maintaining something beautiful and useful, of connecting his community to traditions that stretch back through centuries of English history. of contributing his small part to the gentle network of communication that links village to village across the peaceful countryside. The first of his band members arrives, climbing the stairs with the unhurried pace of those who understand that bell ringing cannot be rushed. Soon others will follow, and the morning air will fill with bronze voices speaking their ancient language of mathematics and music, community and continuity, tradition and gentle innovation. The morning sun streams through the diamond-paned windows of the ringing chamber at St. Bartholomew's Church in Wessex, illuminating charts and diagrams that cover the stone walls like musical scores written in an ancient script. These papers, carefully drawn by generations of tower captains, represent the accumulated wisdom of English change ringing. Mathematical patterns that transform the random clanging of bells into something approaching sacred geometry made audible. Method ringing, as the Victorians termed this sophisticated form of bell music, operates according to principles that would fascinate any student of natural philosophy or mathematical theory. Unlike the simple scales that musicians practice on piano or organ, bell methods create patterns that exist in time rather than space, unfolding according to rules that ensure both complexity and perfect order. The fundamental principle underlying all change ringing methods remains elegantly simple. Each bell must sound exactly once in each row, and no row may repeat until the entire sequence returns to its starting position. Yet from this basic rule emerges complexity that can challenge the most accomplished mathematicians. With 8 bells, the number of possible different rows reaches 40,320, a sequence that would require over 28 hours of continuous ringing to complete. William Hartwell, tower captain at St. Bartholomew's for the past 15 years, traces his finger along one of the method charts mounted on the chamber wall. This particular diagram illustrates Kent treble bob major, a method of such complexity that only the most accomplished bands attempt it. The treble bell's path through the sequence creates a serpentine pattern that weaves between the other 7 bells according to mathematical laws that seem almost mystical in their precision. The notation system used to record these methods developed slowly over centuries, evolving from simple memory aids into a sophisticated form of musical mathematics. Numbers represent the order in which bells sound. 1 to 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, indicating rounds, the natural descending scale, while 2, 1, 4, 3, 6, 5, 8, 7 shows the first change of many methods. To the uninitiated, these sequences of numbers appear meaningless, but to experienced ringers they represent detailed instructions for creating beauty from bronze and time. Each method possesses its own character, its own musical personality that emerges through the specific patterns of bell movements. Plain bob, the foundation method that every serious ringer must master, creates steady, reliable patterns that seem to breathe with natural rhythm. Its changes unfold predictably yet pleasingly, offering beginners a gentle introduction to the mental discipline required for more complex work. Grandsire methods add sophistication through the introduction of singles and bobs, calls that alter the basic pattern to extend sequences or create variations in the musical line. The conductor's skill in placing these calls determines whether a touch will produce satisfying musical phrases or descend into confusion and discord. The best conductors develop almost telepathic awareness of their band's capabilities, pushing toward complexity while maintaining the steady foundation that keeps everyone together. The learning process for new methods requires patience that matches the gradual pace of seasonal change. Ringers typically spend months practicing plain courses of a method before attempting the calls that create extended compositions. Even then, progression comes slowly, marked by small victories and gentle setbacks that test dedication and humility in equal measure. Memory techniques for complex methods borrow from ancient arts of recollection that scholars had used for centuries before printing made such skills less necessary. Experienced ringers create mental maps of bell positions, imagining the sequence as physical movements through space rather than abstract numbers on paper. Some visualize the bells as dancers moving through predetermined choreography, while others hear the patterns as melodies that guide proper timing and placement. The most accomplished ringers develop abilities that seem almost supernatural to casual observers. They can ring complex methods while carrying on conversations, maintaining perfect accuracy through sequences that last an hour or more. Their hands move automatically, guided by muscle memory so deeply ingrained that conscious thought would actually interfere with proper technique. Mathematical principles underlying method construction reveal patterns that connect bell ringing to broader themes in Victorian natural philosophy. The symmetries found in the best methods mirror those discovered in crystal formation, in the arrangement of leaves on plant stems, in the orbital patterns of celestial mechanics. This connection between bell ringing and natural law gave the art a philosophical dimension that appealed to educated Victorians seeking harmony between scientific understanding and spiritual practice. Different towers developed reputations for particular methods or styles of ringing. St. Bartholomew's became known throughout the region for their mastery of treble bob methods, while neighboring St. Michael's excelled in the subtle timing required for Stedman variations. These specializations created networks of mutual respect and gentle rivalry that encouraged innovation while preserving traditional techniques. The physical demands of method ringing shaped the daily lives of dedicated practitioners. Regular practice developed specific muscle groups and coordination patterns that served ringers well into advanced age. Many tower captains continued active ringing into their 70s or 80s, their accumulated experience compensating for any decline in physical strength. Visiting ringers brought news of innovations and variations developed in distant towers, creating an informal communication network that spread successful techniques across the English countryside. A new method pioneered in Yorkshire might reach Devon within months, carried by travelling ringers who served as living libraries of technical knowledge. The seasonal rhythm of method practice followed patterns established by agricultural necessity and religious calendar. Harvest time reduced available ringers as agricultural work demanded longer hours, while winter evenings provided extended opportunities for practicing complex methods that required patient development. Christmas and Easter seasons brought special compositions that celebrated these high points of the church year through particularly elaborate ringing. Competition between methods created gentle controversies that could occupy tower communities for years. Proponents of grandsire methods argued for their musical superiority and historical authenticity, while advocates of plain bop emphasized its mathematical purity and practical accessibility. These discussions, carried on over years of practice sessions and parish gatherings, reflected deeper questions about the purpose and direction of English bell-ringing tradition. Teaching new methods required pedagogical skills that tower captains developed through trial and experience rather than formal training. The best teachers learned to break complex patterns into manageable segments, to identify each student's particular learning style, to provide encouragement during the inevitable periods of frustration and confusion. Some ringers possessed natural teaching abilities that made them valuable throughout their region, traveling between towers to share their expertise. The creation of new methods represented the highest achievement possible within tower communities. Method composition required not only mathematical sophistication, but also musical sensibility and practical understanding of what human ringers could actually accomplish. The few individuals capable of creating successful new methods gained recognition that extended far beyond their local communities, their innovations studied and practiced by towers throughout England. Notation systems evolved to meet the increasing complexity of Victorian method ringing, developing from simple numerical sequences to sophisticated graphical representations that could capture subtle timing relationships and conductors' calls. These diagrams, drawn carefully on parchment or paper, became treasured possessions passed between generations of ringers like family heirlooms. The relationship between mathematical theory and practical ringing created ongoing tensions that enriched tower discussions throughout the Victorian period. Pure mathematicians proposed method constructions that looked elegant on paper, but proved difficult or impossible to ring accurately. Practical ringers developed variations that sacrificed theoretical purity for musical beauty or technical accessibility. The best methods balanced these competing demands, creating patterns that satisfied both mathematical and musical criteria. Regional variations in method interpretation created distinctive local traditions that gave each area its own character within the broader English ringing tradition. Northern towers might favor slightly different timing patterns, while western regions developed their own approaches to conducting complex touches. These variations, subtle to outsiders but significant to practitioners, created rich diversity within apparent uniformity. The psychological aspects of method ringing demanded mental discipline that extended far beyond simple memorization. Ringers learned to maintain concentration through long sequences while managing the physical stress of controlling heavy bells and the social pressure of avoiding mistakes that would affect their entire band. This combination of challenges created a form of moving meditation that provided spiritual benefits regardless of participants' religious beliefs. As William completes his morning review of the method charts lining St. Bartholomew's ringing chamber, he reflects on the accumulated wisdom they represent. Each diagram captures hours of patient practice, years of gradual refinement, generations of dedicated ringers working together to perfect patterns that transform mechanical motion into something approaching art. The methods serve as bridges connecting past and future, preserving ancient traditions while encouraging gentle innovation and improvement. The bells above wait patiently for the morning service, their bronze voices ready to speak the language of mathematics and music, community and devotion, tradition and careful change. Soon the chamber will fill with the concentrated energy of 8 ringers working together, their individual efforts combining to create something larger than any single person could achieve alone, their voices joining the great conversation that echoes across English countryside every Sunday morning of the year. The village of Little Wickham stirs gently in the pale light of dawn, as it has on countless Sunday mornings throughout the long reign of Queen Victoria. Mist rises from the river meadows, dissolving slowly in the strengthening light, while early risers begin their preparations for the day of rest and worship that lies ahead. In households throughout the village, the familiar routine of Sunday morning unfolds with the unhurried pace of well-established tradition. At precisely 7 o'clock, the first gentle tolling from St. Edmund's Tower announces the beginning of another Sunday in the life of this quiet community. The sound carries clearly through the still morning air, reaching every cottage and farmhouse within 3 miles of the ancient church. This initial tolling serves not as a call to immediate action, but as a gentle reminder that the day of worship approaches, allowing ample time for the careful preparations that Sunday morning requires. In the tower chamber high above the village, Tower Captain Edmund Fairfax and his band of 7 ringers have already completed their PoE service preparations. Each rope hangs at precisely the correct length, adjusted for the morning's temperature and humidity. The bells themselves rest in perfect balance, their bronze forms catching the early light that filters through the chamber's narrow windows. Everything stands ready for the morning's complex sequence of ringing that will guide the village through its Sunday observances. The timing of Sunday morning bell ringing follows patterns established over centuries of careful tradition, refined through generations of practice until each element serves its proper purpose in the day's unfolding. The first tolling, beginning at 7, provides a gentle awakening for those who might have slept past their usual rising time. This initial call carries no urgency, no demand for immediate response, but rather offers a peaceful transition from sleep to wakefulness that honors both the need for rest and the approach of sacred time. Between 7 and 8 o'clock, individual bells take turns sounding across the countryside as villages prepare for worship. Each tower maintains its own schedule, carefully coordinated to avoid conflict while ensuring that every community receives proper notice of approaching service times. The overlapping voices create a gentle conversation between parishes, a bronze dialogue that speaks of shared purpose and mutual respect. At 8:15 precisely, St. Edmunds begins its formal service ringing, a quarter peal of grandsire triples that will continue for exactly 45 minutes, concluding at 9 o'clock when the church doors open to receive worshippers. This extended ringing serves multiple purposes beyond simple timekeeping. It announces to the surrounding countryside that St. Edmunds maintains its ancient traditions with proper dignity and skill. It provides the local community with a reliable temporal marker that requires no clock or timepiece to understand. Most importantly, it creates a sustained period of musical meditation that prepares hearts and minds for the worship to follow. The choice of method for Sunday morning service ringing reflects careful consideration of both technical and spiritual factors. Grandsire triples, with its 7 working bells and steady tenor, produces music of sufficient complexity to demonstrate the ringer's skill while maintaining the steady, contemplative character appropriate to Sunday morning. The method's mathematical structure ensures that it will conclude exactly on time, returning to rounds at the precise moment when the last echo should fade into silence. Edmund's band settles into the familiar rhythm of Sunday morning ringing with the practiced ease of men who have shared this responsibility for years. Their movements coordinate automatically, each ringer responding to subtle cues from the bells around him while maintaining his own bell's proper place in the evolving pattern. The physical effort required remains well within their capabilities, allowing them to focus entirely on musical quality and precise timing. The sound that emerges from St. Edmund's Tower possesses qualities that distinguish Sunday morning ringing from weekday practice sessions. The ringers approach their work with slightly greater formality, their concentration deepened by awareness of the sacred context surrounding their efforts. Each strike sounds with crystalline clarity. Each pause between changes extends for exactly the proper duration. Each transition from one row to the next flows with liquid smoothness. In the village below, residents incorporate the bell's voice into their own Sunday morning preparations. Mrs. Pemberton times her breakfast preparations to conclude just as the bells reach their halfway point, while Farmer Jenkins uses the ringing's duration to complete his essential animal care before departing for church. The bells provide a shared temporal framework that synchronizes community life without the harsh urgency of factory whistles or railway schedules. Children growing up in Little Wickham learn to associate Sunday morning bell ringing with the special character of the day of rest. The sound becomes linked in their memories with clean clothes and careful behavior, with extended family gatherings and special meals, with the anticipation and mild anxiety that accompanies weekly encounters with formal worship. These associations, formed in early childhood, often persist throughout entire lifetimes. The acoustic properties of Sunday morning create optimal conditions for bell ringing's community function. Cool, still I carry sound farther and clearer than at any other time of week. The absence of weekday noise, no hammer blows from smithies, no grinding of mill wheels, no calling of vendors or crying of animals being driven to market, allows the bells' voices to reach their full potential as instruments of communication. Neighboring towers coordinate their Sunday schedules through informal networks that prevent conflicts while maximizing each community's ability to hear and appreciate their own bells. St. Edmund's quarter peal concludes just as St. Michael's in Eastfield begins their own service ringing, creating a gentle progression of bronze voices that moves across the landscape like a slow wave of sacred sound. The precision required for successful Sunday morning ringing demands preparation that begins days in advance. Thursday evening practice focuses specifically on perfecting the method chosen for the coming Sunday, while Saturday evening brings final review and any necessary equipment adjustments. This careful preparation reflects the ringer's understanding that Sunday morning allows no opportunity for experimentation or recovery from mistakes. Individual ringers approach Sunday morning with attitudes that blend technical concentration with spiritual preparation. Many regard their ringing as a form of prayer or meditation, their physical movements becoming vehicles for contemplation and devotion. Others focus primarily on the musical and mathematical aspects of their work, finding spiritual significance in the successful creation of beautiful, ordered sound. The gradual conclusion of Sunday morning ringing creates one of the week's most distinctive moments in village life. As the quarter peal approaches its final changes, experienced listeners can detect subtle shifts in rhythm and tone that signal the approaching return to rounds. The mathematical inevitability of this conclusion provides a sense of completion and satisfaction that prepares the community for transition from preparation to worship. The final rounds of Sunday morning ringing ring out across Little Wickham with special authority and finality. Each bell sounds in its proper place with perfect timing, creating the descending scale that represents order restored, pattern completed, preparation concluded. The silence that follows seems to hold special quality, pregnant with anticipation for the worship that is about to begin. Church bells throughout England speak this same language every Sunday morning, their bronze voices creating a national conversation that connects rural villages to market towns, ancient parishes to modern industrial centres, traditional communities to the rapidly changing world of Victorian progress. The network operates without central coordination or technological infrastructure, sustained entirely by the dedication of local volunteers who maintain traditions that connect them to centuries of English history. As the last echoes of St. Edmund's service ringing fade into the brightening morning, village life shifts smoothly into the next phase of its Sunday rhythm. Families emerge from cottages dressed in their finest clothes, children walking with the careful deportment that Sunday morning requires, adults carrying prayer books once smoothed by decades of use. The transition from preparation to worship unfolds with the same gentle inevitability that governs the mathematical patterns of the bells themselves, connecting human community to ancient rhythms that pulse beneath the surface of modern Victorian life. On a crisp October evening in 1867, an unusual sound drifts across the Yorkshire Dales. Not the familiar pattern of evening practice, but something more urgent yet still controlled. From the tower of St. Margaret's in Thorndale comes a sequence of changes that experienced ringers recognize immediately as a call change method, a form of communication that carries specific meaning to those trained to understand its branch vocabulary. The message, encoded in the precise timing and pattern of bell movements, travels from village to village through a network that operates entirely without written records or official organization. Tower captains throughout the region have developed an informal system of communication that uses their bells to share information about visiting ringers, special events, and community celebrations that might interest neighboring parishes. Tonight's message from Thorndale announces the successful completion of a peal, a mammoth ringing achievement that required over 3 continuous hours of perfect method ringing. Such accomplishments occur rarely enough to merit sharing with the broader ringing community, and the distinctive call changes floating across the Dales inform experienced listeners that something worthy of celebration has taken place in the valley below. At Westhelmy, 3 miles distant, Tower Captain Robert Ashworth pauses in his evening garden work to listen carefully to the patterns drifting from Thorndale's direction. His trained ear recognizes not only the celebratory nature of the ringing, but subtle characteristics that identify the specific method used and approximate duration of the achievement being announced. Without consulting any written record or sending any messenger, he now possesses information that will be discussed and appreciated throughout his own tower community. This informal network of bell tower communication represents one of the most fascinating aspects of Victorian rural life, a system that operated entirely through shared knowledge, mutual respect, and the gradual development of conventions that required no central authority to maintain or regulate. Each tower captain learned the basic signals through years of careful observation and instruction from more experienced colleagues, absorbing traditions that existed solely in living memory and practical demonstration. The vocabulary of inter-tower communication remained necessarily limited, but surprisingly expressive within its constraints. Specific patterns announced births of children to ringing families, while different sequences marked deaths of respected community members. Wedding celebrations received their own distinctive treatment, with elaborate ringing that might continue intermittently throughout the day of ceremony. Special achievements in ringing itself. Successful peals. First performances of complex methods, visits from renowned ringers, merited their own forms of bronze announcement. Weather conditions played crucial roles in determining how far these bell tower messages could travel and how clearly they could be understood by distant listeners. Cold winter evenings provided optimal conditions for long-distance communication, with still air-carrying sound across valleys and over hills with remarkable clarity. Summer heat created acoustic conditions that limited effective range but enhanced the musical quality of shorter transmissions. Rain and wind could render long-distance bell communication impossible, forcing communities to rely on more traditional forms of message carrying. The development of inter-tower communication protocols required careful coordination to prevent confusion and ensure that important messages reached their intended recipients. Timing became crucial. Thorndale's celebration ringing began at 8 o'clock, when most towers had concluded their own evening activities, but early enough for the sound to carry before atmospheric conditions changed. The duration and specific patterns of the ringing conveyed additional information about the nature and significance of whatever event prompted the communication. Individual towers developed reputations that extended throughout their regions, creating networks of mutual recognition and respect that facilitated communication and cooperation. Thorndale had earned particular distinction for their mastery of complex methods and their success in training young ringers, making tonight's peal announcement especially significant to neighboring communities. When such accomplished ringers achieved notable successes, the entire region shared in the celebration. The training required to participate effectively in these communication networks extended far beyond simple bell handling skills. Tower captains needed to develop detailed knowledge of neighboring towers' capabilities, schedules, and preferred methods. They learned to recognize the acoustic signatures of different towers, distinguishing between the bright, clear voice of St. Margaret's at Thorndale and the deeper, more mellow sound of Holy Trinity at Moorhaven. Economic aspects of inter-tower communication created interesting dynamics within regional ringing communities. Information about successful fundraising techniques, sources for bell founding services, and innovations in tower equipment traveled rapidly through the network, helping smaller or less wealthy towers improve their capabilities. Announcements of visiting expert ringers allowed communities to arrange instruction sessions that might otherwise be impossible to coordinate. Social relationships between towers reflected the broader patterns of Victorian rural society while maintaining their own distinctive characteristics. Towers in market towns often served as informal headquarters for surrounding rural communities, their greater resources and more frequent ringing activities making them natural centers for regional coordination. Ancient towers with particularly fine bells or distinguished histories commanded special respect that transcended simple geographical boundaries. The seasonal rhythm of inter-tower communication followed patterns that synchronized with agricultural cycles and religious calendars. Autumn brought announcements of harvest celebrations and preparatory ringing for winter months ahead. Spring carried news of resumed evening practices and plans for summer expeditions and exchanges. Christmas and Easter seasons generated extensive networks of celebratory ringing that created some of the year's most elaborate inter-community communication. Visiting ringers served as living newspapers, carrying detailed information between towers that supplemented the basic messages conveyed through bell signals themselves. These traveling practitioners brought news of innovations in technique, reports of exceptional achievements, and personal connections that strengthened the broader ringing community. Their visits represented highlights of tower social calendars occasions for extended ringing sessions and informal instruction that benefited entire local communities. The preservation of communication traditions required constant attention from tower captains committed to maintaining standards and passing knowledge to younger generations. Methods that might seem obvious to experienced practitioners often contain subtle complexities that could be lost if not carefully taught and regularly practiced. The informal nature of the system made it particularly vulnerable to disruption during periods when key individuals moved away or local communities experienced other changes. Innovation within traditional communication patterns proceeded slowly and carefully, with new signals or modifications to existing ones requiring gradual acceptance by multiple communities before becoming established practice. The conservative nature of this process helped ensure that changes truly improved the system rather than creating confusion, but it also meant that beneficial innovations might take years to spread throughout a region. Documentation of inter-tower communication remained almost entirely absent from official church records or local government documents, reflecting the informal, volunteer-driven nature of the entire system. This lack of written records makes reconstruction of Victorian bell communication networks challenging for modern historians, though careful analysis of tower records and local newspapers sometimes provides glimpses into this fascinating aspect of rural social organization. The psychological satisfaction derived from successful participation in inter-tower communication added another dimension to the rewards that drew Victorian men to bell ringing. The knowledge that one's local achievements could be recognized and celebrated by distant communities provided motivation that extended beyond purely local concerns. Tower members took pride in knowing that their Sunday morning ringing contributed to a regional conversation that connected them to the broader world of English bell ringing tradition. As Robert Ashworth completes his evening garden work and prepares to share Thorndale's news with his own tower community, he reflects on the remarkable system that allows villages separated by miles of countryside to maintain regular communication without relying on roads, postal services, or any form of technology more complex than bronze bells and hemp ropes. The network operates through nothing more than shared knowledge, mutual respect, and the patient dedication of men committed to preserving traditions that connect them to centuries of English history. Tomorrow evening, when Westthorn's own ringers gather for their weekly practice, tonight's celebration at Thorndale will be discussed and appreciated, the achievement adding to the store of community knowledge that makes each local group part of something larger than itself. The bells that announce tonight's success will inspire tomorrow's practice, creating ongoing cycles of communication and encouragement that sustain English bell ringing through decades of gradual change and development. In the industrial heart of London's East End, where the Thames curves through districts thick with workshop smoke and factory steam, stands the ancient foundry of Mears and Steinbank, bell founders to Her Majesty and creators of bronze voices that sing across England's countryside. Here, in buildings that have echoed with the sound of molten metal for over 2 centuries, craftsmen practice arts that bridge the medieval world and Victorian industrial progress. The creation of a church bell requires knowledge that combines metallurgy with acoustics, engineering with artistry, mathematical precision with intuitive understanding of how bronze behaves under the extreme conditions of casting and cooling. Master founder George Mears, grandson of the foundry's founder, possesses skills accumulated through 40 years of dedicated practice, knowledge that exists nowhere in written form, but lives entirely in experienced hands and careful observation. The process begins months before molten metal meets prepared molds, with careful analysis of the musical requirements that the new bell must meet. Church towers throughout England possess their own acoustic characteristics, their own requirements for volume and tone quality, their own relationships to existing bells that must be honored in any addition or replacement. George Mears has developed the ability to predict how a bell will sound in its intended tower simply by studying architectural drawings and understanding the mathematical relationships between bell dimensions and musical intervals. Bronze itself demands respect and understanding that few materials require. The alloy used for English church bells contains approximately 77% copper and 23% tin, a proportion that craftsmen have refined over centuries of experimentation and careful observation. Too much tin creates bells that ring brilliantly but crack easily under stress. Too little tin produces bells that lack the clear, sustained tone that proper change ringing requires. The optimal proportion creates bronze that combines durability with musical excellence, metal that will continue producing beautiful sound for centuries after its creation. The construction of bell molds represents one of the foundry's most closely guarded secrets. Techniques pass from master to apprentice through generations of careful instruction and patient practice. The inner core, built up from specially prepared clay and horse dung, must be shaped to mathematical precision while remaining porous enough to allow gases to escape during the casting process. The outer cope, which determines the bell's external form and inscription, requires equal precision in its construction and positioning. Loam, the special clay mixture used for mold construction, comes from deposits carefully selected and prepared according to methods that have changed little since medieval times. The clay must possess exactly the right plasticity to hold fine detail while remaining stable under the tremendous heat of molten bronze. Too plastic, and the mold will distort during casting. Too rigid, and surface details will be lost or imperfect. Master mold makers develop almost supernatural sensitivity to these subtle material properties. The furnaces used for melting bronze operate according to principles that combine ancient wisdom with Victorian engineering innovation. Built from specially selected fire bricks and designed to achieve temperatures exceeding 2000 degrees Fahrenheit, these furnaces require careful management throughout the long casting process. The fuel itself, a mixture of coke and charcoal, must burn with precisely controlled intensity to ensure that the bronze reaches proper casting temperature without overheating that might compromise the alloy's acoustic properties. Casting day arrives with the solemnity appropriate to an event that will create an instrument designed to serve its community for centuries. The foundry workers, many of whom have participated in hundreds of previous castings, approach their tasks with the concentrated attention that dangerous work with molten metal demands. Yet beneath this practical focus lies awareness that they are participating in an ancient creative act that connects them to craftsmen stretching back through English history to medieval times. The moment of casting itself unfolds with dramatic beauty that never loses its power to inspire awe, even among workers who witness it regularly. Molten bronze, glowing with internal fire and flowing like liquid sunlight, pours from carefully positioned crucibles into the waiting molds. Steam rises in great clouds as the metal meets clay, while the foundry fills with sounds that seem to come from another world entirely. Hissing, crackling, deep rumbling that speaks of fundamental forces being harnessed to human purpose. Cooling requires patience that stretches across several days, during which the bronze gradually surrenders its heat to the surrounding earth and air. The foundry workers monitor this process carefully, understanding that too rapid cooling would create internal stresses that compromise the bell's musical quality, while too slow cooling might allow impurities to settle unevenly throughout the bronze. Temperature control during this crucial period determines whether months of careful preparation will result in success or require the expensive and time-consuming process of remelting and recasting. The moment of revealing arrives with anticipation that has built through weeks of preparation and days of cooling. Workers carefully remove the outer mold material, revealing the bronze form within like archaeologists uncovering ancient treasures. Surface quality provides immediate indication of casting success. Smooth, even bronze indicates that temperatures remained optimal throughout the process, while rough areas or visible inclusions suggest problems that may affect both appearance and acoustic performance. Initial testing of newly cast bells requires skills that combine musical sensitivity with technical understanding of bronze acoustics. Master founder George Mears possesses the ability to predict a bell's final tuning characteristics from preliminary strikes, while the bronze remains work-hardened from casting. His trained ear can detect minute variations in tone that will require correction through careful filing and shaping of the bell's interior surface. The tuning process represents perhaps the most delicate aspect of bell founding, requiring removal of bronze in precisely calculated amounts from specific areas of the bell's interior. Too aggressive an approach can ruin months of work in minutes, while insufficient correction leaves bells that will never harmonize properly with their intended companions. The work proceeds slowly, with frequent testing and careful measurement to ensure that each adjustment moves the bell closer to its intended pitch. Transportation of completed bells from London foundries to rural church towers creates logistical challenges that test Victorian engineering and organizational skills. Bells weighing several tons require specially constructed wagons, carefully planned routes that avoid steep grades and weak bridges, and teams of experienced handlers who understand the precise techniques needed to move such massive, delicate objects safely. The installation of new bells in existing towers often requires modifications to ancient structures that must honor both architectural heritage and practical necessity. Medieval towers were typically built to accommodate smaller, lighter bells than Victorian campanologists preferred, necessitating structural reinforcements that strengthen frameworks while preserving historical character. These projects required collaboration between bell hangers who understood the mechanical requirements and architects sensitive to ecclesiastical building traditions. Bell hanging itself represents a specialized craft that combines engineering precision with traditional woodworking and metalworking skills. The frame that supports a ring of bells must distribute enormous forces safely throughout the tower structure while providing the precise positioning that proper change ringing requires. Each bell hangs from specially designed headstock assemblies that allow controlled rotation while preventing dangerous over-travel that could damage bell, tower, or ringers. The wheels that control bell movement receive particular attention during installation, since their diameter and balance determine how easily ringers can control heavy bells during extended sequences. Too light a wheel makes the bell difficult to set properly, while excessive weight creates control problems during rapid passages. Master bell hangers develop intuitive understanding of these relationships, creating installations that seem to anticipate ringers' needs and respond smoothly to their guidance. Regional variations in bell hanging techniques reflect different approaches to solving common problems while honoring local traditions and working within existing architectural constraints. Northern towers often favor slightly different frame designs that accommodate the stone construction typical of their region, while southern installations might incorporate features that work better with the timber framing more common in those areas. The completion of a new bell installation brings communities together for dedication ceremonies that combine religious observance with celebration of craftsmanship and community achievement. These events often feature visiting ringers from neighboring towers, creating opportunities for extended ringing that demonstrates the new bell's capabilities while strengthening regional networks of communication and friendship. As evening settles over the Mears and Steinbank foundry, the day's work concludes with the satisfaction that comes from practicing ancient crafts in service of traditions that will outlast any individual craftsman or community. The bells cast here today will speak their bronze language across English countryside for centuries to come, their voices joining the great conversation that connects past and future through the eternal present of mathematical music, made manifest in metal and time. The calendar of Victorian England pulsed with rhythms far older than the industrial age that surrounded them. Rhythms that found their truest expression in the seasonal celebrations that brought communities together around ancient traditions. In the bell towers scattered across the countryside, These feast days and special occasions created opportunities for extended ringing that demonstrated both technical skill and communal devotion, transforming ordinary villages into centers of bronze voice celebration. Easter morning in the village of Ashford underlined dawn's clear and bright, promising perfect conditions for the day's elaborate ringing program. In the Tower of St. Catherine's Church, Tower Captain Jonathan Whitmore and his expanded band of 12 ringers prepare for one of the year's most demanding and rewarding challenges, a full peal of grandsire sinks that will require over 3 hours of absolutely perfect coordination and concentration. The significance of Easter morning ringing extends far beyond mere celebration or technical demonstration. For Victorian communities still closely connected to agricultural rhythms and seasonal cycles, Easter represents the ultimate triumph of renewal over decay, of life returning to a world that has endured winter's apparent death. The bells serve as voices of this renewal, their bronze songs announcing not only religious celebration, but the return of light, warmth, and growing things to the natural world. Preparation for major feast day ringing begins weeks in advance, with special practice sessions devoted to perfecting the methods and building the endurance necessary for extended performances. The physical demands of ringing continuously for 3 or 4 hours challenge even the most experienced practitioners, requiring careful conditioning and strategic planning of individual roles within the larger effort. Younger ringers might handle the lighter treble bells that require more rapid movement, while older, more experienced hands take responsibility for the massive tenor bells that demand steady strength rather than quick reflexes. The selection of methods for feast day ringing reflects careful consideration of both technical and symbolic factors. Easter morning typically features the most complex and beautiful methods that a tower can successfully accomplish, demonstrating the community's respect for the occasion while showcasing skills developed through months of patient practice. The mathematical precision required for these elaborate compositions mirrors the divine order that Easter celebrates, creating connections between human achievement and spiritual significance. Corpus Christi processions in June bring different challenges and opportunities for bell tower communities. Rather than the sustained, stationary ringing of Easter morning, Corpus Christi requires mobile ringing that can accompany religious processions through village streets and countryside paths. This specialized form of celebration involves smaller bells that can be carried by hand, creating moving sources of sacred sound that follow the progressive religious ceremony through the landscape. Harvest festivals in September provide occasions for community-wide celebrations that bring together agricultural and religious themes through extended ringing programs that might continue intermittently throughout entire weekends. These events often feature visiting ringers from neighboring parishes, creating opportunities for friendly competitions and demonstrations of regional variations in technique and method. The bells speak not only of thanksgiving for successful harvests, but of the continuing vitality of rural traditions in an increasingly industrialized world. Christmas ringing creates some of the year's most technically demanding and emotionally rewarding challenges for tower communities. The 12 days of Christmas allow for extended programs that might include multiple peals, demonstrations of particularly complex methods, and special compositions created specifically for the season. The darkness of December evenings enhances the carrying power of bells while creating atmospheric conditions that seem to amplify their spiritual significance. New Year's Eve brings unique opportunities for towers to demonstrate their capabilities before audiences that include many who rarely attend regular church services. The tradition of ringing out the old year requires precise timing to ensure that the final stroke sounds exactly at midnight, creating moments of symbolic transition that connect individual communities to the broader passage of time. These performances often attract listeners from considerable distances, creating temporary gatherings that strengthen regional community bonds. Royal celebrations during Victoria's long reign provided opportunities for coordinated ringing programs that linked local communities to national events and imperial themes. The Queen's birthday, coronation anniversaries, and major royal weddings generated ringing programs that extended across entire counties, creating networks of branch celebration that demonstrated popular loyalty while showcasing local musical traditions. The technical challenges of feast day ringing require innovations in both method selection and band organization that test the limits of traditional tower capabilities. Extended peals demand rotating leadership, as fatigue affects even experienced conductors' ability to maintain perfect accuracy. The most successful bands develop systems for sharing these responsibilities while maintaining the seamless coordination that complex methods require. Weather considerations become particularly crucial during major feast day celebrations that cannot easily be postponed or rescheduled. Tower captains learn to assess atmospheric conditions and adjust their plans accordingly, perhaps substituting shorter but more intensive ringing for planned extended peals when wind or temperature threatens to compromise sound quality or carrying distance. The acoustic effects of feast day ringing create temporary transformations in community soundscapes that remain in memory long after the bronze voices fade to silence. Villages that might normally hear only brief practice sessions or simple service ringing suddenly find themselves surrounded by hours of complex, beautiful bell music that seems to sanctify the entire landscape. Children remember these occasions throughout their adult lives, associating particular methods or acoustic effects with specific celebrations and seasonal transitions. Regional coordination of feast day ringing requires informal networks of communication and cooperation that operate entirely through personal relationships and shared commitment to maintaining high standards. Tower captains exchange information about planned celebrations, coordinate timing to prevent conflicts, and arrange mutual support for ambitious projects that exceed individual communities' normal capabilities. The social aspects of feast day preparation bring tower communities together in ways that strengthen relationships while building toward common goals. Extended practice sessions required for complex feast day ringing create opportunities for conversation and fellowship that supplement the purely musical aspects of the work. Shared meals, informal instruction sessions, and planning discussions transform bell towers into social centers that serve their communities in ways that extend far beyond Sunday morning service ringing. As St. Catherine's Easter morning peal reaches its halfway point, with another hour and a half of perfect ringing still required, the bronze voices continue their mathematical celebration of renewal and resurrection. Each strike sounds with crystal clarity in the cool morning air. Each pattern unfolds according to laws that seem to connect human creativity to divine order. Each moment contributes to a performance that will be remembered and discussed throughout the region for years to come. The bells speak of communities united in common purpose, of traditions maintained across generations of change and development, of the enduring human capacity to create beauty through patient cooperation and shared devotion to excellence. The Easter morning song joins thousands of others across England, creating a national chorus of celebration that links village to village, past to present, earth to heaven through the eternal language of bronze and time. February 14th, 1869, brought to England a tempest of such ferocity that it would be remembered for generations afterward as the Great Storm of St. Valentine's Day. Across the northern counties, winds reached velocities that stripped ancient trees from their roots and sent church spires toppling like wheat before the scythe. In the bell towers scattered throughout Yorkshire and Lancashire, the storm created challenges that tested not only the physical resilience of bronze and stone, but the social bonds that held tower communities together through crisis and recovery. At Moorhaven Priory, where 8 centuries of worship had created one of England's finest rings of bells, Tower Captain Samuel Thornton watched with growing concern as wind velocities increased throughout the early afternoon. The medieval tower that housed their bells had weathered countless storms, its massive stone walls and buttress construction designed to endure whatever weather England's climate might deliver. Yet the violence of this particular tempest exceeded anything in living memory. The bells themselves hung silent in their chamber, secured with additional ropes as a precaution against the building motion that severe winds could create even in towers as substantial as moor havens. Samuel understood that bronze bells, despite their enormous weight, could become dangerous projectiles if tower movement exceeded their hanging system's capacity to maintain control. The hemp ropes, saturated with rain driven through ancient window frames, stretched and contracted unpredictably in the changing conditions. By evening, reports began reaching Moorhaven through the limited communication channels that remained functional during the storm's peak intensity. St. Michael's at Thornfield had lost their tenor bell when wind-induced tower movement caused a catastrophic failure of the medieval oak frame that had supported the ring for over 3 centuries. The massive bell, cast in 1647 by the legendary founder Robert Mott, lay shattered in the nave below, its bronze voice silenced forever by forces beyond human control. The immediate aftermath of such disasters revealed the strength of relationships that bound bell tower communities together across regional boundaries. Even before formal roads became passable again, messages traveled through improvised networks that demonstrated the deep connections between neighboring towers. Farmers carried news between villages on horseback, traveling paths that remained negotiable when main roads lay blocked by fallen trees and collapsed bridges. Within days of the storm's passage, offers of assistance began reaching damaged towers from communities that had themselves suffered losses but retained capacity to help their neighbors. Spare bells, temporarily unused due to frame damage or ringer shortages, became available for loan to towers whose own bronze voices had been silenced by the tempest's violence. Experienced ringers volunteered to travel considerable distances to provide instruction and assistance during reconstruction efforts. The technical challenges of storm recovery required expertise that few individuals possessed, creating opportunities for regional cooperation that strengthened networks while addressing immediate practical needs. Bell hangers capable of designing and installing replacement frames found themselves in great demand, their specialized knowledge crucial for restoring damaged towers to functional condition. The work demanded careful analysis of structural damage, innovative solutions to problems that standard techniques could not address, and patience that measured progress in months rather than weeks. Financial aspects of storm recovery tested community resources while revealing the depth of commitment that sustained bell-ringing traditions through periods of crisis and change. Insurance against storm damage remained rare in rural areas, leaving communities to rely on their own resources and the voluntary contributions of regional networks for funding expensive reconstruction projects. Church building funds, accumulated slowly through decades of parish fundraising, often required complete depletion to address storm damage that exceeded any previous planning. The restoration of Thornfield's Tower provided a case study in Victorian community cooperation and resource management. The shattered tenor bell required replacement with an instrument of equal size and musical quality, necessitating a major foundry commission that stretched the parish's financial resources to their limits. Local residents contributed not only money but labor and materials, with farmers donating timber for scaffolding and craftsmen providing skilled work at reduced rates or without compensation. Temporary arrangements during reconstruction periods created interesting variations in regional ringing patterns and communication networks. Towers with reduced numbers of functional bells developed simplified methods that allowed continued practice and service ringing while major repairs progressed. These adaptations often produce a surprisingly beautiful musical effect that influenced future method development long after original capabilities had been restored. The psychological impact of losing beloved bells affected tower communities in ways that extended far beyond simple inconvenience or musical disappointment. Bells that had called communities to worship for centuries carried emotional and spiritual significance that their sudden silence rendered painfully apparent. The absence of familiar bronze voices created voids in community soundscapes that left residents feeling disconnected from ancient rhythms that had previously provided structure and meaning to weekly life. Regional solidarity during the recovery period demonstrated the strength of informal networks that connected tower communities across substantial geographical distances. Collections taken up in undamaged towers provided crucial financial assistance for reconstruction projects, while visiting ringers helped maintain morale and skills in communities where local bands had been disrupted by equipment damage or member displacement. The process of re-establishing communication networks after major disruptions required patient rebuilding of relationships and coordination protocols that had developed over decades of gradual evolution. Tower captains found themselves reconstructing from memory the informal agreements and mutual understandings that had previously operated so smoothly as to seem natural, rather than carefully maintained social arrangements. Innovation born from necessity during storm recovery contributed lasting improvements to bell installation techniques and tower design principles. Engineers studying storm damage developed enhanced understanding of wind loading effects on tall structures, leading to frame designs that provided greater resistance to future weather extremes while maintaining the precise positioning that quality ringing required. The gradual restoration of normal ringing activities brought communities together in celebrations that combined thanksgiving for recovery with renewed appreciation for traditions that had seemed threatened by natural forces beyond human control. First rings on restored bells became community events that attracted listeners from considerable distances, creating occasions for acknowledging the contributions of all who had participated in reconstruction efforts. Documentation of storm recovery efforts, preserved in parish records and local newspapers, provides modern historians with unusual insights into the social organization and community values that sustained Victorian rural life during periods of crisis. The priority given to bell restoration, often ahead of other church repairs that might seem more practically important, demonstrates the central role that these bronze voices played in community identity and social cohesion. Professional relationships between bell founders and rural communities deepened during reconstruction periods as craftsmen worked directly with local residents, rather than through intermediary contractors or church officials. These collaborations created mutual understanding and respect that influenced both foundry practices and community expectations, leading to innovations that benefited the broader bell ringing tradition. As Thornfield's new tenor bell speaks its first changes in the restored frame of St. Michael's Tower, its voice carries special significance that extends far beyond simple replacement of storm-damaged equipment. The sound represents community resilience, regional cooperation, and the continuing vitality of traditions that connect present moments to centuries of English history. The bell's bronze song joins the regional conversation that links village to village, tower to tower, past to future through the eternal language of mathematical music and shared devotion to beauty, order, and community service. The storm's legacy lives on in stronger frames, improved installation techniques, and deepened appreciation for the fragility and value of traditions that require constant care and protection. The Great Tempest of 1869, for all its destruction and disruption, ultimately strengthened rather than weakened the networks that sustained English bell ringing through the remainder of Victoria's reign and beyond. The summer of 1874 brought to the English countryside changes more subtle, yet ultimately more profound than any storm or seasonal transition. Telegraph lines, strung on newly planted poles that marched across ancient landscapes with geometric precision, began connecting market towns and railway stations in networks of communication that operated at speeds previously unimaginable to rural communities. At Millbridge, a prosperous market town in the heart of Gloucestershire, The arrival of telegraph service created fascinating tensions between old and new forms of communication that would reshape community life in ways barely perceptible at first, yet ultimately transformative in their cumulative effect. The bronze voices that had carried messages between villages for centuries now found themselves competing with copper wires that could transmit complex information across vast distances in mere minutes. Tower Captain Henry Blackwood, whose family had served St. Peter's Church for 3 generations, observed these changes with the careful attention that experienced practitioners of traditional crafts bring to evaluating innovations. The telegraph offered undeniable advantages in speed and precision that made certain forms of bell tower communication seem suddenly antiquated. News of births, deaths, and community events could now travel between towns faster than any bell message could be composed and transmitted. Yet the telegraph's mechanical efficiency came with limitations that highlighted the unique values of bell tower networks. Telegraph messages required literacy skills that many rural residents lacked, technical equipment that few communities could afford, and professional operators whose services cost money that agricultural laborers earned slowly through hard physical work. The bells, by contrast, spoke a language accessible to anyone with ears to hear, required no payment for their messages, and operated through community cooperation rather than commercial transaction. The installation of telegraph equipment in market towns created new centers of communication that gradually altered the flow of information through rural districts. Previously, news had traveled at the pace of horses and human feet, creating natural delays that allowed communities time to absorb and respond thoughtfully to distant events. Telegraph transmission eliminated these contemplative intervals, creating expectations for immediate awareness and rapid response that changed the rhythm of rural decision-making. Bell tower networks adapted to these changing conditions by developing increasingly specialized roles that complemented rather than competed with telegraph services. While the copper wires carried urgent business communication and official governmental announcements, the bronze voices continued providing community services that no mechanical system could replicate. The gentle announcement of approaching worship services, the celebration of local achievements and seasonal transitions, the maintenance of social bonds that held communities together through periods of rapid change. The contrast between telegraph and bell communication became particularly apparent during major regional events that required coordination between multiple communities. When the railway extension reached Millbridge in autumn of 1875, telegraph messages coordinated the official ceremonies and business arrangements with mechanical efficiency. But the sustained celebratory ringing that continued throughout the day created emotional and spiritual dimensions of celebration that no written message could provide. Young people growing up during this transitional period learned to navigate between traditional and modern communication systems with remarkable adaptability. Children who had learned to interpret bell messages from their earliest years also mastered the basic principles of telegraph operation, understanding both systems as complementary rather than competing technologies. This generation would become bridges between old and new ways of maintaining community connections. Economic pressures created by telegraph expansion influenced bell tower communities in complex ways that revealed both the strengths and limitations of traditional volunteer-based organizations. Some towers lost members to employment opportunities created by telegraph construction and operation, as young men with technical aptitudes found paying work that offered alternatives to the unpaid service that bell ringing represented. Other towers gained new members as telegraph workers, appreciating the precision and coordination that their jobs required, discovered similar satisfactions in the mathematical aspects of change ringing. The pace of life in telegraph-connected communities began shifting in ways that affected everything from market schedules to religious observances. Information that previously required days to travel between distant locations could now be transmitted and received within hours, creating expectations for rapid response and immediate action that conflicted with traditional rhythms of rural decision-making. Bell ringing, with its emphasis on patient practice and gradual improvement, provided valuable counterbalance to these accelerating pressures. Technical innovations in bell equipment often incorporated lessons learned from telegraph engineering, particularly in areas of precision manufacturing and quality control. Wire drawing techniques developed for telegraph construction influenced rope-making technology, producing hemplines with more consistent strength and durability characteristics. Foundries adopted measurement standards inspired by telegraph equipment manufacturing, creating bells with more precise tuning and dimensional accuracy. The relationship between traditional and modern communication systems created opportunities for mutual learning that benefited both technologies. Telegraph operators, trained to maintain perfect timing and coordination in their transmission work, often proved exceptionally capable bell ringers when they chose to join tower communities. Their understanding of systematic coordination and attention to precise detail translated directly into improved ringing technique and method execution. Regional networks of bell tower communication evolved during this period to emphasize services that telegraph systems could not provide effectively. Emergency communication during severe weather remained a crucial function, since telegraph lines proved vulnerable to storm damage, while church towers and their bells typically survived conditions that disrupted more modern technology. Community celebrations and seasonal observances continued relying on bell networks that could reach rural audiences scattered across areas where telegraph service remained unavailable or prohibitively expensive. The training of new ringers during the telegraph age required modification of traditional instruction methods to accommodate changed expectations and different learning patterns. Young people accustomed to the immediate results that telegraph communication provided sometimes struggled with the patient, gradual progress that bell ringing mastery required. Tower captains learned to emphasize different aspects of the tradition, focusing on mathematical beauty and physical coordination rather than simple communication utility. Cultural resistance to telegraph expansion often found expression through renewed emphasis on traditional communication methods, including intensified development of bell tower networks and expanded programs of community ringing. Some villages deliberately delayed telegraph installation while investing additional resources in bell equipment and training, viewing technological independence as preferable to dependence on systems controlled by distant commercial interests. The documentation of bell ringing traditions received new emphasis during this period as practitioners recognized that traditional knowledge might be lost if not systematically preserved. Tower captains began maintaining written records of methods and techniques that had previously existed only in living memory and practical demonstration. These efforts to preserve traditional knowledge reflected broader Victorian concerns about maintaining continuity with the past while adapting to rapidly changing present conditions. Professional relationships between bell founders and telegraph manufacturers created interesting cross-pollination of technical knowledge that influenced both industries in unexpected ways. Precision measurement techniques developed for telegraph equipment manufacturing improved the accuracy of bell tuning and dimensional control. Conversely, traditional metalworking knowledge from bell founding contributed to solving problems in telegraph wire production and installation hardware development. The coexistence of traditional and modern communication systems during the latter decades of Victoria's reign created a period of rich technological diversity that offered communities choices in how they connected with the broader world. Telegraph services provided efficient transmission of urgent business and official information, while bell networks continued offering community services that emphasized social cohesion and cultural continuity over pure efficiency. As Henry Blackwood secures St. Peter's bells after another evening practice and watches telegraph messages flashing along copper wires that parallel the ancient roads below, he recognizes that both systems serve essential but different human needs. The telegraph speaks the language of commerce and government, speed and efficiency, distance and abstraction. The bells speak older languages of community and celebration, tradition and patient devotion, proximity and physical presence. The future would belong to systems that combine the best aspects of both approaches, but for now, in this moment of transition between old and new, the bronze voices continue their ancient conversation across landscapes where telegraph poles sound like modern monuments among medieval churches, where copper wire carries messages of business while bronze bells carry messages of the heart. As the 19th century draws toward its close and Queen Victoria's long reign enters its final decades, the bell tower networks that flourished throughout her empire faced challenges and transformations that will reshape English rural life in fundamental ways. The industrial age that provided prosperity and innovation to Victorian England also brings forces of change that threaten traditions rooted in agricultural rhythms and community-based social organization. In the ancient Tower of St. Swithin's Church at Bramblewood, Master Ringer Edward Hartwell contemplates changes that have already begun altering the character of bell-ringing communities throughout the countryside. Young men who might once have devoted decades to mastering the mathematical intricacies of change ringing now find themselves drawn toward employment opportunities that offer regular wages and prospects for advancement beyond the boundaries of rural parishes. The railway expansion that connected even remote villages to distant cities created mobility that disrupted traditional patterns of community formation and maintenance. Talented ringers could now pursue opportunities in London or Manchester, taking their accumulated skills away from towers that had invested years in their development. The knowledge that had once been preserved through stable local communities began scattering across broader geographical areas, creating new challenges for maintaining traditional standards and techniques. Yet these same forces of change also created opportunities for bell-ringing traditions to reach new audiences and develop in directions that pure isolation might never have permitted. Urban churches, built to serve growing industrial populations, often possessed resources that allowed for larger rings of bells and more ambitious musical programs than rural towers could afford. City-based ringing societies began organizing expeditions to countryside towers, bringing fresh enthusiasm and financial support to communities struggling to maintain ancient traditions. The Central Council of Church Bell Ringers, established in 1890, represented a formal recognition that traditional informal networks required institutional support to survive the challenges of modern times. This organization, bringing together representatives from towers throughout England and Wales, created structures for preserving and disseminating traditional knowledge while encouraging innovations that honored historical precedent. Educational initiatives developed during this period reflected growing awareness that bell-ringing traditions required systematic preservation and transmission if they were to survive the social changes transforming rural England. Written instruction manuals began supplementing oral tradition, while regional schools for ringers provided intensive training that compressed learning processes that had previously required years of gradual apprenticeship. The standardization of ringing notation and method nomenclature proceeded slowly during the late Victorian period, balancing the benefits of improved communication between towers against traditional preferences for local variation and individual interpretation. The development of common terminology and symbols facilitated the exchange of information between distant communities, while potentially reducing the rich diversity that had characterized regional ringing traditions. Technological innovations in bell founding and installation incorporated lessons learned from Victorian engineering and manufacturing advances while maintaining respect for traditional acoustic and musical principles. Steam-powered machinery enabled more precise bell shaping and tuning, while improved transportation networks allowed foundries to serve broader geographical areas more effectively. These developments reduced costs and improved quality while maintaining the essential characteristics that gave English bells their distinctive voices. The role of women in bell-ringing communities remained limited throughout the Victorian period, reflecting broader social constraints that restricted female participation in many forms of public activity. However, informal contributions by wives, daughters, and sisters of male ringers proved crucial for maintaining tower communities through provision of social support, fundraising assistance, and preservation of historical knowledge that might otherwise have been lost during periods of disruption. Regional variations in ringing traditions gained new recognition and appreciation during the late 19th century, as improved communication allowed tower communities to learn about practices developed in distant areas. Methods that had remained purely local innovations for generations suddenly gained broader attention, while techniques developed to address specific regional conditions found applications in towers facing similar challenges in different geographical areas. The documentation of Victorian bell ringing practices accelerated during this period, as participants recognized that traditional knowledge faced threats from social and technological changes beyond local control. Tower histories, method collections, and technical manuals began appearing in printed form, creating permanent records of traditions that had previously existed only in living memory and practical demonstration. International interest in English bell-ringing traditions developed slowly but persistently during the late Victorian period, as British emigrants carried their knowledge and enthusiasm to colonies and foreign countries where church construction created opportunities for establishing new towers and training new communities of ringers. These overseas developments, while remaining small in scale, demonstrated the universal appeal of traditions that combined technical skill with community cooperation. Professional opportunities related to bell ringing began emerging during this period as growing interest in historical preservation and cultural documentation created demand for expertise in traditional crafts and practices. Bell hanging specialists, method composers, and tower restoration experts found themselves able to make livings from knowledge that had previously been shared freely within amateur communities. The influence of Victorian bell-ringing networks extended beyond their immediate communities to affect broader patterns of rural social organization and cultural development. The emphasis on cooperative effort, patient skill development, and mutual support that characterized successful towers provided models for other community organizations facing similar challenges in maintaining volunteer-based activities during periods of rapid social change. Musical developments within bell ringing during the late Victorian period reflected broader trends in English composition and performance, while maintaining the distinctive mathematical character that separated change ringing from other musical traditions. Composers began creating touches and peals that incorporated harmonic principles borrowed from contemporary classical music while respecting the fundamental constraints imposed by bell ringing's mathematical foundation. The preservation of ancient bells and towers gained increasing attention as Victorian interest in historical conservation began recognizing the cultural value of structures and traditions that connected present communities to medieval predecessors. Restoration projects often involved careful research into original construction techniques and historical ringing practices, creating new forms of cooperation between amateur historians, professional craftsmen, and active ringing communities. Economic changes affecting rural communities during the late Victorian period created ongoing challenges for maintaining tower networks that depended entirely on volunteer effort and community financial support. Agricultural depression reduced the prosperity that had previously sustained church maintenance and equipment replacement, while population shifts toward industrial centers reduced the pool of potential ringers available to rural towers. The development of cycling as a popular recreational activity created new opportunities for communication and cooperation between tower communities, as enthusiastic ringers could now travel considerable distances for single-day visits and exchanges. Bicycle clubs organized around bell-ringing interests facilitated the spread of methods and techniques while strengthening regional networks through increased personal contact and shared experiences. Social changes affecting rural clergy during this period influenced bell-ringing traditions as increasingly educated priests brought different perspectives on the role of bells in church life and community organization. Some welcomed innovations and supported expanded ringing programs, while others preferred simpler approaches that emphasized religious utility over musical complexity. These clerical attitudes significantly affected individual towers' development and regional participation in broader ringing networks. As Edward Hartwell completes his final practice session as master ringer at Este, Swithins before retiring to make way for younger leadership, he reflects on the remarkable changes he has witnessed during 4 decades of devoted service to the ancient art. The towers still stand. Their bronze voices still speak their mathematical language across peaceful countryside. Their communities still gather to maintain traditions that connect present moments to centuries of continuous practice. Yet everything has changed as well. Telegraph wires carry messages that once required bell signals. Railway timetables organize community life around distant industrial schedules, and young people think increasingly of opportunities that lie beyond the boundaries of rural parishes. The bell networks that flourished during the early Victorian period must now find new purposes and develop new strategies for remaining relevant to communities whose attention turns increasingly toward national and international concerns. The legacy of Victorian bell-ringing networks extends far beyond the specific communities and technical achievements that mark their golden age. These informal organizations demonstrated that complex coordination and communication could be maintained through voluntary cooperation and shared devotion to common goals. They preserved ancient traditions while encouraging innovation and improvement. They created social bonds that strengthened communities while connecting them to broader regional and national networks. Most importantly, they proved that human beings could create beauty, order, and meaning through patient cooperation and mutual dedication to excellence. The mathematical music that emerged from their bronze instruments spoke languages of precision and harmony that transcended immediate practical utility, creating value that enriched community life in ways that no purely functional system could match. As the 20th century approaches and Victorian England prepares for transformations that will reshape every aspect of traditional life, the bell towers continue their ancient conversation. Their bronze voices, speaking patterns perfected through centuries of practice and devotion, carry forward into an uncertain future the accumulated wisdom of generations who understood that some forms of human communication require no advancement beyond the eternal dialogue between bronze and time, mathematics and music, community and tradition. The networks they created may fade, their specific achievements may be forgotten, but their example of patient cooperation in service of beauty and truth will continue inspiring communities yet to come. Their bronze legacy echoing across time like the bells themselves, persistent and clear, mathematical and musical, human and eternal. As we reach the end of our journey through the quiet world of Victorian bell-ringing networks, the gentle bronze voices that carried our story continue their eternal conversation across English countryside, in towers from Yorkshire to Cornwall, from ancient parish churches to modern industrial centres. The traditions we have explored persist in forms that would be recognizable to the ringers whose dedication created the golden age of change-ringing communication. The networks they built without blueprints or official authorization demonstrate the remarkable human capacity for creating order, beauty, and meaning through voluntary cooperation and shared commitment to excellence. Their achievement reminds us that the most lasting forms of communication often operate below the surface of official history, carried forward by ordinary people devoted to preserving traditions that connect past and future through the eternal present of bronze and time. Sleep well. knowing that somewhere in England tonight, bells hang silent and patient in ancient towers, ready to speak their mathematical language when morning comes again, their voices joining the great conversation that has echoed across peaceful countryside for centuries past and will continue, God willing, for centuries yet to come. Thank you for joining us in the Sleep Library. Rest peacefully in the gentle rhythm of bronze and time.